Hey, everybody. So, what I wanted to do today is share an example of how reading descriptions from meditative practice uh, involves asking questions. And in fact, if we look at any description of meditative practice carefully and with curiosity, all kinds of questions are going to come up. And that's a way into the description and to getting a feel of what's going on. So this is informed by phenomenology and hermeneutics, but I'm not going to get theoretical about it. I'm just going to read a couple of descriptions anonymously and offer a few commentaries just to sort of exemplify the kind of questioning that I want to encourage you to do when you read other people's accounts of what's going on. So let's start here. First, I'll read the description. Sitting to practice today, I was aware of a general feeling of confusion, heaviness, fatigue, and antsiness. I was aware repeatedly of a restlessness regarding the practice. In a small way, I did not want to stay with the contents, but move on from them, and was annoyed that a more significant shift wasn't happening. However, there was no moving on from there. And so only over time it became obvious that I was restless and impatient. Here I returned to my intention repeatedly, which was to turn toward him and to remain as awake as possible throughout. Eventually, a deepening must have occurred because I don't remember much from the rest of the practice. Even the oppressive summer heat and the sound of the wind outside dropped away eventually. Coming out of practice, I still feel tired, but I'm also aware of a shift having occurred, like a small restart somewhere inside of me, a reorientation that had gotten lost over the course of the day and seemed to have been a source of confusion and restlessness. Okay, so that's the description. It's short, and yet look how much is packed in. There's a lot packed into this. I'm not going to give a full unfolding of this whole description, but here's some thoughts about how to read something like this. So when you look at the description, imagine first of all, what is this person's idea or ideal or the imagined scenario about what's supposed to be happening? You know, because there's frustration. So something isn't happening that it seems like he wants to or she wants to have happening. So what's the frustration about? What is the what do you and what can you detect uh, is imagined or desired that isn't happening? Who or what? So for frustration, there's a lot of frustration here, right? So who or what is this person frustrated with, right? What's the object of the frustration? So those are immediate questions that come to mind. If we dig into the emotional quality of the description, what's the flavor? So I've already sort of begun talking about frustration, but so what are the emotional flavors here? More than one, right? So I would say, for example, discomfort, dissatisfaction, complaint maybe there, which raises the question for us as readers: what would it be like to amplify that complaint, amplify that discomfort, and amplify that frustration to really get like what is it like? What's it seem to be about to get the full sense of it? This is the kind of questioning that I want to encourage you to do with yourself when you're reading. If you really dramatized and emphasized what you're getting emotionally in this, what would it look like? Like, what's the message here? Who or what is he dissatisfied with? To whom is he complaining? Okay. So there's a capital H. This is a written description. So who is that capital H? Right. So let's assume that it's God or something like that. So is God the object of the frustration? And if not, why not? These are, again, these are the kind of questions that come up, right? So it seems like the efforts to meet God are not being rewarded from the point of view of the person writing this, would be my first take. So that's the first half, let's say, of the description. And this is just beginning to dig into, what's going on here. So, but then notice in the second half, there's a shift for this person. It's always important to notice if there's a point in a story where there seems to be a shift for the person telling it. First, this is going on, then something else happened. Okay, we could call that a felt shift, a shift of meaning, however you want to, name it, but something happens. Right? So it's always important to notice those sort of things. So the shift seems to happen alongside the frustration or in the middle of the frustration. And he says something else small seems to have happened. That small is very interesting. Like, what does that seem to mean? Like, how come it's small? What does small mean? That's a kind of an assessment, like it's small. So small and meaningful at the same time. Um, and it also, for him, it seems to have something to do with why he feels confused and restless. So, what is that? It seems like there's a shift or a change in how he sensed or felt himself in relation to how he's oriented himself. But what is that shift? Like, what was that shift like? How did it relate to the unpleasant feelings? If something restarted, what is it that it seemed like it restarted? If we were actually researchers, we would probably want to go back and have a follow-up interview. Like, can you tell me more about that shift? What was that like? That's a phenomenological way of opening it up more. Just tell me more what it was like. You know? It sounds like something was found that had been lost touch with. He'd lost touch with something. But what was that? What was that for him? So all of this, I'm sort of stirring the pot. These are all the kind of questioning that I encourage you to do. Let's take a look at one other description here. All right. Another description from someone else. As I was practicing today, I noticed the following. As I was chanting subvocally the Allahu, the vibration of the words on my body seemed to bring out a feeling of deep grief. When I was breathing in, the grief would disappear and peace would manifest. For the whole session, this was going on. Not a grief for a specific event, not because of a memory, just an emotional, physical sensation that I would name grief. There was some kind of pleasure in observing this cycle. Again, short, pithy description, but really full. There's a lot going on. So, what was this person's relation to the feelings of grief like as he did remembrance? What seemed to be the meanings of grief, as far as we can tell from this short description? Um, and was this mostly a bodily and emotional process for him? Um, Without an imagined scenario, but nevertheless, the sense of something being grieved. That's really interesting. What's he telling us about that? And he's telling us that the word grief fits for him. So it really makes sense. Like that name, grief, for him really does fit with what he was experiencing. So, what is grief and grieving about? That's already also something we could really dig into. What is grieving? What does grief imply? So again, is there a shift in here? Yes, there's actually a repeated shift that he's describing. And it occurs, it seems to begin with a deepening sense of the grieving, and then the grief seems to drop off and he feels peaceful. Not in a one time way. He's telling us this is kind of cyclical throughout and connected to breathing. Right? So when he describes this cycle, it seems like he's circling or cycling through deepening contact with that grief, right? And then feeling released to more peacefulness by staying with the physical vibration of the remembrance itself. Uh, so again, this just invites more opening up. How would we describe that cycle? Like what's going on? Like how could we describe that without theorizing about it abstractly, but just like what seems to be going on for him in this cycling? And then can we tell, do we have a hint from this description whether grief itself is something that's familiar for him? Does it seem to be something new that has not occurred to him before? Does it seem something familiar? Again, this is something where we would, if we were researchers, we want to go back and ask more um, about the grief. But what's your sense so far? So again, really just going off the top of my head in terms of sharing about how to start really thinking more about descriptions as inviting questioning. So this is to help you all, to help us all take the descriptive practice that everyone is engaging in to a next level. So it's awesome that the writing is happening because that's tuning you all in increasingly to both what's going on with you and what's going on with each other. Now, add fuel to the fire in a positive sense by allowing your imagination to play, by letting go of trying to explain what's going on, like theoretically in any of the descriptions, but really asking, setting theory aside, what seems to be happening already for the person in their description? What questions does it raise for you? Just sharing those questions that come up and whatever insights are there would be a great contribution. Thanks.